on Jerusalem Dateline. This week on Jerusalem Dateline, the largest pro-Israel group celebrates a new relationship between Washington and Jerusalem.
For the first time in many years, perhaps even many decades, there is no daylight between our two governments.
But see how this UN body spends a lot of its time condemning the Jewish state. And take a trip on the Gospel Trail and see the places where Jesus walked. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you this week from just across the valley of Jerusalem's old city walls. Well, about 6,000 miles away from here, nearly 20,000 pro-Israel supporters gathered at the annual American-Israel Public Affairs Committee meeting. Their goal? To strengthen the relationship between the United States and Israel. Here's CBN News' Amber Strong.
They came in support of the Jewish state, to celebrate culture, discuss the latest in Israeli technology, but mostly they came to talk policy. Each year, 18,000 people descend upon AIPAC's policy conference. The unique event gives supporters of Israel a chance to get up close and personal with those politicians making decisions directly affecting U.S.-Israel relations. And at this year's conference, one message seemed to resonate: rebuilding that relationship with Israel.
For the first time in many years, perhaps even many decades, there is no daylight between our two governments.
Last year, a then-candidate Trump impressed the crowds with a scathing assessment of President Obama's relationship with Israel.
He may be the worst thing to ever happen to Israel, believe me. Believe me.
And while the crowds responded with enthusiasm, AIPAC President Lillian Pincus was quick to remind attendees and the media of the importance of a bipartisan conference. This year, all eyes were on Vice President Mike Pence.
It is great to be back to AIPAC for the first time in a long time. America has a president who will stand with our allies and stand up to our enemies. The United States will no longer allow the United Nations to be used as a forum for invective against Israel or the West.
Beyond strengthening that bond between the U.S. and Israel, another topic loomed at the conference: Iran.
Both our governments recognize that foremost among those challenges remains Iran. We both recognize that the nuclear deal does not block Iran's path to a bomb.
Naftali Bennett, Israel's Minister of Education, told CBN News the time to act is now.
We've got an Iran who has a goal to create a global hegemony over the entire region. We cannot allow Iran to threaten the free world with Iranian nuclear bombs. We have to stop that. Now, today they do not have those nuclear weapons, but they're on a path to reaching them.
He says it's a challenge that the two allies can meet.
We have to stop that path, and there's a few ways we can do it, and we're working on it together with the United States.
Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair agrees that it's time for the West to push back against Iran.
Be firm, stand up, and make sure that, look, it's a very simple thing. If you had a benign regime in Iran, all of the problems of the Middle East would be easier to resolve.
The U.S. Senate confirmed David Friedman as the new U.S. ambassador to Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sent a video congratulating Friedman. It's one more sign of the growing cooperation between the United States and Israel. Here's what Netanyahu had to say about the prospects for peace.
Israel is committed to working with President Trump to advance peace with the Palestinians and with all our neighbors. I believe that the common dangers faced by Israel and many of our Arab neighbors now offer a rare opportunity to build bridges towards a better future, a future more prosperous, more secure, more peaceful.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is likely to consume a lot of time of Netanyahu and the new U.S. ambassador. But one sticking point is the continued Palestinian terrorism inside Israel. But what's to blame? Some Palestinians blame it on their anger over the contention they're living under Israeli occupation. But in this exclusive report, some Palestinians blame it on hopelessness and despair. Corruption in the Palestinian Authority could be driving young Palestinians to carry out terror attacks.
In general, people are not feeling safe. If anybody complains against someone who belongs to Fatah or the Palestinian Authority, or against somebody who is related to someone in the Palestinian Authority, the police reject the complaint.
Ahmed is one of some 2 million Arabs living under PA control in the West Bank, also known as Judea and Samaria. We've hidden his identity for his protection.
Even if somebody has been assaulted by someone who belongs to the Palestinian Authority and complains, they force him to back down, or he is threatened with death or jail.
The Palestinian Authority government is in Ramallah. Since its establishment in the mid-90s, the U.S. has committed about $5 billion in assistance. That would make Palestinians among the world's largest recipients of foreign aid.
Sometimes I believe that the Revolutionary Council is the council of corruption, and the executive committee is a committee to enforce the policy of corruption.
Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah says there's no corruption in the PA.
And usually if we have any report of any corruption, these people will be brought to justice. This is our policy. But in any country, mistakes can happen. And, if anyone commits any of these issues, actually, he or she will be brought to justice.
According to a survey last year, more than 95% of Palestinians see their government as corrupt.
We have freedom of expression in Palestine. People can say anything.
Everybody knows that once you complain, you're putting your life in danger. In the policy of the Palestinian Authority, if a person has a problem with an official, even if this official asks him for a bribe, the person has to pay, even if he has nothing. The Palestinian Authority and the security services come against him, and nobody will protect him.
President Trump says he wants a peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians. But Ahmed says lack of peace isn't the problem.
I want the West and the United Nations to establish an inquiry delegation, an honest one, to inquire into all those crimes that are perpetrated against Palestinians by the Palestinian Authority. I am convinced that once justice will be served, hundreds of those guilty people will be put in prison.
Ahmed wants the West and the United Nations to pressure the PA to become an honest government. Until then, he says, there will be no state and terrorism will continue. Coming up, find out about the UN group where the Jewish state doesn't seem to get a break. Behind me, you can see the red roofs of Yemen Moshe, one of the first neighborhoods built outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. Well, the United Nations has a reputation for bashing the Jewish state. But the new U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, told AIPAC that the days of Israel bashing at the UN are over.
There are a lot of threats to peace and security, but you're not going to take our #1 democratic friend in the Middle East and beat up on them. And I think what you're seeing is they're all backing up a little bit. The Israel bashing is not as loud. They didn't know exactly what I meant outside of giving the speech, so we showed them. So when they decided to try and put a Palestinian in one of the highest positions that had ever been given at the UN, we said no, and we had them booted out. So for anyone that says you can't get anything done at the UN, they need to know there's a new sheriff in town.
Hillel Nua's UN Watch has been fighting the UN's bias against the Jewish state for years in the Geneva-based Human Rights Council. Here's a video including a stunning rebuke he delivered on Israel's behalf.
Israel has used the worst kind of abuse, ethnic cleansing, and imposing a regime of apartheid.
Israel continues to exercise apartheid in Palestine, which constitutes a crime against humanity, violence and terrorism that are being exercised against the Palestinian people.
These violations include the building of apartheid walls to legitimize the theft of land and to Judaize Jerusalem.
the separation wall is an example of the apartheid policy practiced by Israel.
Israel's practices of discrimination as well as extremism.
United Nations watch, have the floor.
Mr. President, let me begin by putting the following on the record. Everything we just heard from the world's worst abusers of human rights, of women's rights, of freedom of religion, of the press, of assembly, of speech, is absolutely false and indeed Orwellian. Today's report does not consider Israelis to be deserving of human rights, consistent with the approach of this Council, where today's notorious agenda item against Israel completely ignores their human rights. Now, over the weekend, President Abbas announced he was giving his highest medal to Rima Khalaf, who resigned from the Economic Commission of Western Asia, a Beirut-based UN agency of 18 Arab states, after Secretary General Guterres rightly instructed her to remove an absurd report which accused Israel of, quote, apartheid. Mr. President, why is Mr. Abbas celebrating a report written by the notorious Richard Falk after his own Palestinian mission here tried in 2010 to remove Mr. Falk on the basis that he was, quote, a partisan of Hamas, as we know from WikiLeaks? The accusation against Israel is absurd. Israel's 1.5 million Arabs.
The delegation of Palestine has the floor.
More than one statement goes beyond the mandate of this sitting, using unacceptable terms about Ms. Rima Khalaf, and so we would like this to be stopped. We have noted some terms which are humiliating vis-à-vis the Council, and we call for the respect of our tradition within the Human Rights Council. Thank you.
We would support the viewpoints that have already been expressed by the State of Palestine as well as Egypt.
Now, the previous speaker can continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel's 1.5 million Arabs, whatever challenges they face, enjoy full rights to vote and to be elected in the Knesset. They work as doctors and lawyers. They serve on the Supreme Court. Now, I'd like to ask the members of that commission that commissioned that report, the Arab states from which we just heard, Egypt, Iraq, and the others, how many Jews live in your countries? How many Jews lived in Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco? Once upon a time, the Middle East was full of Jews. Algeria had 140,000 Jews. Algeria, where are your Jews? Egypt used to have 75,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Syria, you had tens of thousands of Jews. Where are your Jews? Iraq, you had over 135,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? Mr. President, where is the real apartheid? Why is there a UN commission on the Middle East that does not include Israel? From the 1960s and the 70s, they refused to include Israel. Where is the apartheid, Mr. President? Mr. President, why are we meeting today on an agenda item singling out only one state, the Jewish state, for targeting? Where is the apartheid, Mr. President?
Earlier, we talked with Noor in our Jerusalem studio about the battle he faces at the UN.
Every time I walk into the UN Human Rights Council, which was founded by incredible idealists like Eleanor Roosevelt, was the founding chair of the UN Commission on Human Rights, the great humanitarian of her age, and to see today having members like China, Russia, Cuba, Pakistan, Venezuela, it's outrageous. So every time I walk in there, I remind myself that I am walking into an Orwellian institution where human rights have been turned upside down and that it's an alternate reality, and we go in there to try and speak truth to power, and that's why I'm the most hated man in Geneva.
Can you describe what kind of treatment Israel gets in the United Nations?
Israel gets a treatment that no other country gets. At every session of the Human Rights Council, for example, there's a day on Israel, just like there's a day on human rights situations around the world, and then there's one day just for Israel. It's a special agenda item only to criticize so-called Israeli violations. There's no agenda item for genocide that happened in Darfur and Sudan. There's no agenda item for Syria, where millions have been displaced, barrel bombs are being dropped on children, nor on North Korea, one of the most horrific places on the planet for human rights. Only Israel, the Jewish state, gets its own agenda item. And if you look at the number of resolutions, Israel is typically condemned in half the resolutions at the Human Rights Council. The expert on Israel looks only at Israeli violations, which are presumed in advance, and won't look at any Palestinian action. So if there's, God forbid, a suicide bombing in Israel, the expert will criticize Israel's response when it goes to try to find and arrest the terrorists, but it won't criticize a suicide bombing because that's a Palestinian action, which is not in his mandate to examine it. So it's really a very distinctive treatment that is designed to create a narrative as Israel as some sort of wicked human rights abuser.
What is it like for you?
It's not pleasant to be in an assembly where you know that many of the people in front of you in the room despise you for critiquing the UN when they do things that are against their own principles, for taking on tyrannies that have seats of power and influence there. It's not pleasant, but we get support around the world, and we know that we're doing the right thing, and we're going to continue speaking out.
Up next, is Christian persecution in the Arab world new? We'll take a look when we come back. Behind me, you can see the Church of the Dormition on Mount Zion. It's where many Christians worship here in the city of Jerusalem. And during the past few years, Muslim persecution of Christians in the Middle East has exploded. But is it anything new? CBN News correspondent Julie Stahl asked author and Palestinian affairs expert Pinchas Enbari about his new book and the story it tells of Christians in the Middle East nearly 100 years ago.
It's called a riding storm. Storm is the name of a horse, and it represents the spirit of freedom. It's about the Christian community in Western Galilee during the British Mandate, the struggles, the environment, and what the Christians were all about in those far days.
Yeah, and that would be the Christian Arab community, right?
Christian Arab community, yes, but the heroine is an American lady of Arab origin.
She's not just any Arab lady, right? She has a history in this land.
Yes, because she was born in America as an American girl, and she was riding horses in America, but her father did not find his place in America, and he came back with all the family back to Palestine, and here she finds herself as an American Arab lady in an Arab village, and she did not find herself there.
So we're talking about something that took place, what, 70 years ago, 80 years ago?
Yes, it was during the British rule over Palestine and the first years of the State of Israel. And now, what is the lesson for our time? We can find in the story the roots of what happened to the Christians in the Middle East, except for Israel. Israel, they are protected. She behaved as a free woman. And she was riding her horse. And the Muslims and the Arabs find it provoking to their sentiments and their values. And she was exposed to instigations from the mosque. And this is representing what will happen to the Christians in the coming years.
How do you see the place of the Christians in the Muslim world?
Well, it is a clash of civilizations because the Christians are Arabs like the Muslims, but still they are different Arabs. The place of a woman is different than the place of the woman in the Muslim society. And as much as the Muslims became less and less tolerant to everybody, towards the Jews and towards the Christians, the same. So they found themselves in the corner. They could not ally themselves with the Jews because otherwise they were massacres already long ago. So they found some refuge in Arab nationalism. But now Arab nationalism is gone. So they are lost. Nobody is there to protect them. Only in Israel they are protected.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Holiday, the hero of the story, after she was disappointed from Arabism and what happened to her because of Arabism, she wanted to take her daughter out of Arabism. And when her daughter, Violet, found a nice Jewish boy, so the mother encouraged their love, and the mother wanted them to marry. But here again, Arab nationalism and intolerance interfered, and the daughter was smuggled outside of Israel, so she will not be slaughtered under family dignity.
Wow. Yeah, that's not uncommon in the Middle East, is it?
It happens.
Up next, come see where Jesus walked. Pilgrims and tourists visiting Israel can now literally take the same path that Jesus walked. Here's CBN News correspondent Julie Stahl again, taking us on the Gospel Trail.
The trek begins on the outskirts of Nazareth, here on Mount Precipice.
The Gospel Trail is a trail that offers the nature and topography and botany and zoology of the time of Jesus. The emphasis on the trail is that one will see what somebody in Jesus' time or Jesus himself would have seen when he walked from Nazareth to Capernaum.
Tourism Ministry official Ayal Carlin calls it much more than a footpath.
The trail itself is accessible through bicycles too, or through horses. It's a low level of difficulty along most of the trail. It's just magnificent, scenery.
No one knows exactly the way Jesus took, but the 40-mile trail connects places related to his life and ministry. Access points along the way allow tourists to spend a little or a long time on the trail. It's marked with this distinctive sign. This group of Latin American Christians visited the trail.
It's a beautiful view. We see a wonderful sea. There's great mountains all around us. There's a great vegetation. And we're able to see the actual hill where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount.
Oscar Merlo says it's a great opportunity for his group.
We're excited to take this journey and just to stand on this hill and to know that there were villages that actually existed here. It's richness of history and culture and of our faith as well, to know that Jesus maybe stood there where you're standing at.
The trail ends here at Capernaum, where the Bible says Jesus made his home by the Sea of Galilee.
It's just a great trail, and I think also Israelis will appreciate it, and also people who will come and enjoy it from motivation of faith or just a motivation of seeing beautiful sights.
And while it may be the end of the trail, it's not the end of the trip. You might not be able to walk on the water, but you can take a boat ride and sail off into the sunset on the Sea of Galilee. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Capernaum, Israel.
The scenery in the Galilee is beautiful, and it's a wonderful experience to be in the same place where Jesus was when he walked here on the earth. Well, that's it for this edition. Remember, you can follow us on our social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or even YouTube. And please share us with your friends. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.